A major breakthrough in a murder case following decades of investigation. A man has been arrested and charged with murder over the 1996 killing of rapper Tupac Shakur in Las Vegas. A Nevada grand jury indicted Duane Davis, who goes by Kef D, in connection to the killing. Davis was arrested this morning while on a walk near his home. Authorities said he was the commander who ordered Shakur's death. He was one of the last living witnesses to the fatal drive-by shooting in September 1996. Shakur was in a car and waiting at a red light when a white Cadillac pulled up next to him and gunfire erupted. He was shot multiple times and died a week later at the age of 25. The suspect has long been known to investigators and has himself admitted that he was in the Cadillac. The judge denied him bail.
Well, don't we have some interesting developments? Reggie Wright Jr. is now an official suspect entered into the court in a court document in the Kef D murder trial. That's an interesting development. And I would just say this. There is a lot of evidence that points to death row records. And Russell Poole originally blamed Suge Knight for the murder because he couldn't understand that there was a difference between death row records and Suge Knight. But there were factions inside of death row records, and one of those factions was Reggie Wright Jr. And now that he's been named as an official suspect, I think there's going to be a lot of fingers pointing at him. There's going to be a lot of investigation into him, and that's probably going to yield results, as it has in the past. The bodyguards were all talking about how something didn't smell right. The goose is cooked, all that stuff. And there's an awful lot of evidence that does point to him. He got all the guns out the way so that there wouldn't be anybody firing back. And there's a lot of evidence that points to him. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the court case. Now, I don't think the attorneys that are handling this are very smart, to be honest with you. And if you're listening, I don't mean to offend you, but, it's kind of dumb when you think about it. You got all kinds of evidence that points to Reggie, and yet that evidence isn't entered into the court yet. And maybe that's their strategy. But they wait until a month before the trial to even float Reggie's name. That's kind of dumb, if you ask me, especially with all of the public info that points towards Reggie. And Reggie was actually a witness in the grand jury to get the indictment, which that makes no sense. Reggie was the one that went to every single one of the interviews, and he sat in on the interviews. A suspect in the case is sitting in on the interviews. Reggie is an actual official suspect in the Biggie murder case. And those attorneys that have been handling Kef D have not entered any of that Biggie info into this case, which is voluminous. And so I would just say that these guys are probably not too bright, and they have an investigator who's probably not too bright, but bright enough to have floated Reggie's name. So we'll see what happens. It's going to be interesting. We're all sitting with our popcorn. We're waiting to see what we see in this. The confession letter was reached out by Chris Blatchford to Las Vegas Metro Police Department in 1998. They had no interest in the confession letter. Those were valuable clues back then that could have been followed up on, but they had no interest. Russell Poole went to Las Vegas Metro Police. They had no interest in solving the case back when he went there, which had to be 97 or 98. So you ask yourself, how much information is there that's already in the public record, and how much information would Las Vegas Metro Police actually be required to release if they were properly noticed on discovery and if there was a true investigation that was being done. But this is obviously a low-budget attorney representation, probably ineffective counsel. It's going to be argued, if there's a conviction, that it was ineffective counsel because there's so many things that they didn't do in this case. And Las Vegas Metro Police needs to be held to account for why they didn't want the confession letter, why they didn't want to follow up on those leads back then. And all of a sudden, they want to solve the case with Keefe D, who obviously was just a braggart and wanted to sell books, wanted to make some money because he saw Greg Kading making hundreds of millions of dollars off of this stuff. Now, Greg didn't make hundreds of millions, but there were hundreds of millions spent on his projects for sure. And Keefe D saw all that money and said, I want my cut. And so he floated this whole thing and wrote a book and, decided that he was going to take credit for something that never happened. Because why? Orlando had a busted up shoulder. He wasn't shooting anybody that night. And Las Vegas Metro Police had him on video surveillance, which they disclosed to Russell. He was at the bar with Corey Edwards, and he could not have been in the car when Tupac got shot. So all this is bullshit, and everybody knows it. And when Compton PD tried to pin it on Orlando and they offered him up, Las Vegas Metro Police had no interest in Orlando because they had already cleared him as a suspect. That needs to come out at this trial. It probably won't because they have dumb attorneys. It probably won't because they have a dumb investigator. But what's crazy about this is that Edie Fall was the original attorney in this, and Edie's kind of out of the picture, it seems now. But Edie actually represented Orlando Anderson, and Edie would know all these things. So we'll see what happens. But I don't expect that they are going to be effective in providing a defense for Keefe D, because you have a confession that was made in a book. It's in writing, and it doesn't matter whether it's true or not true. It's a confession that's been made, and they're going to try and get a conviction off of this. And it really is ineffective counsel if they're this many years in, they're 2 years in on this case, and they're just now floating Reggie's name. I mean, the publicly available documents have mentioned Reggie way before now. And so it really seems like Keefe D's not getting effective counsel. But we'll see what happens. Standing by, watching with great interest. More later.
Anybody that ever put their hands on me, I'll tell you, might not get you that day, but you're going to get got.